the world has, spreads equal talents, but it doesn't spread equal opportunity. And I think that if you don't if you don't expose your kids to that, then they don't get that perspective. And I mean, a lot of that comes, I think, from my upbringing, but it's certainly been something that has been potentiated by Katie's worldview.
Pete, you're a first generation American. Tell me about how that has shaped you. And it's starting to already come out in your answers, but tell me.
Sure.
You've clearly thought about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I didn't think about it growing up, but in retrospect, I think it proves foundational. I think so. Just so I can give you sort of the framework, my parents were professors at university in Bratislava, which is now the capital of Slovakia. And it was the late 60s. Obviously that was Czechoslovakia at that time was an Eastern Bloc country under sort of Soviet rule with basically a puppet government. In Czechoslovakia, there were some overtures on democracy. And then in sort of a sentinel event called the Prague Spring in 1968, Russian tanks came into the capital of Prague. Famously, there was a person who set themselves on fire. It was much...
Unbearable lightness of being. Think of that.
Yeah.
That was the movie.
And my parents, and especially my dad, who was someone who was always idealized America and its freedoms, found, told my mom that, I can't raise my kids in this type of environment. And so what he did was, he said that, he would try and escape as a political refugee. And because of sort of circumstances, they didn't have any family in anywhere else in the world. All my family, and to this day, everyone is still in either the Czech Republic or the Slovak Republic. But my dad emigrated as a political refugee and settled. His first place was in Harlem. And he got a job as sort of a grunt engineer, made enough money, and then sort of was able to communicate with my mom that she should try and escape as well. Wow. And my mom, they had already had my oldest sister, Sue, at the time. So she was 8. My mom, at that time was potentially going for a PhD. So one of the few women engineers in that whole country that was going to be a PhD candidate at that time. And they gave her an opportunity to go across the border to Vienna, which is right across from Bratislava, and with her child, which was sort of an extraordinary circumstance. And so they were in a refugee camp there for several months until they were able to get entry into the United States, and then they joined my dad, and then soon after moved to Queens. So that's where I was born. Just a year and a half later, my sister was born in between. So they had 3 young kids living sort of a gritty life. My mom barely spoke the language. Here she was, someone who was highly accomplished, had stature, certainly in her sort of local society, and she had the most menial job that an engineering firm could have, which is just doing the drawings. So she couldn't practice to her degree. Someone took her in and offered her that, basically minimum wage. And so fast forward a little bit, my sister is struggling in that environment in the New York public school system. My parents are struggling financially, 2 parents both working, kids going to daycare during the day. But my mom knew that, it would not end up well if my oldest sister was still in that environment with the negative influences, and it was really starting to impact her in a fundamental way. So she basically said that we have to move to a place where they have at least a good school system. And so we moved to northern Jersey, which is where I grew up from age 5 to 18. And I would say that, immigrants, I think, succeed for a variety of reasons. But retrospectively, when I think about it, the things that motivated me were that, on the one hand, there was a profound sense of instability, financial, social, not a lot of cultural supports, no family to rely on. So there was that instability and uncertainty, and the pathway out, as it were, was to get an education. And on the flip side, there was a sense of, I think, potency and ability, knowing that my parents were these literally highly successful, like at the top of academia in their country. So I knew, at least within me, that potential existed. So I would say that the dichotomy of, profound instability in your environment and a true sense of sort of personal accountability in terms of the opportunity that was given to you. I think that, those types of things, I mean, if you look at like Indian Americans of our generation now, I think that is, and then before that, I think Southeast Asian Americans, I think it just sort of plays itself in that, you have these kids that are growing up in households where they see their parents, working their fingers to the bone. So they get this sense, they get the work ethic, but yet they see their family struggle financially, and, in other ways, all the things that come with that, with financial insecurity. And I think it ultimately just sort of translates into, diligence, hard work, and then delayed gratification, this understanding that, you have to work hard for the future. And what I think it's translated for me is, I think on the one hand, a profound sense that, opportunities are not equivalent, right? My sister, who grew up in the same household, never went to college. There was a period of time when she struggled with, not just only her academics, but, there was a period of time when she ran away from home at 16. There was an early pregnancy. There were some other things that you could sort of surmise. And yet here I am just several years later, growing up in a comfortable sort of lower middle class or middle class environment with a good academic system. And I feel like all of that opportunity was there for me.
Yeah. And would you be the same if it hadn't been for your older sister?
Oh, I definitely don't think so. I think that, that it gives you a real sense that, you can't take that opportunity for granted, right? And then, where I grew up in northern Jersey, that was another sort of, I would say, extraordinary little microcosm of what the world should be like. The reality was, on my street it was a cul-de-sac, and every single family on the cul-de-sac was first-generation Americans.
Wow.
There was Orthodox Jews next to a Dutch and German immigrant, next to us, next to a Taiwanese immigrant, next to a Colombian immigrant.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Ricans next to them. Next to them were Pakistani. Next to them were Greek immigrants. Loud. And then
I plead the fifth.
and then as if on cue, there was the end house, which was the only pool, which is an above ground pool where all of the kids would hang out with, was like a fiesta every weekend because it was a gay Puerto Rican couple. Yeah, right? You could not script that.
No.
And here
the
you
American
had this sense
dream
of here you had this sense of all of these people coming here for opportunity, and then then they would go into this good public school system where they got exposed to our town was, I would say, the least affluent. the other 3 towns, some of the most affluent towns in northern Jersey. So I would say that, the juxtaposition of, you had a bunch of sort of smart kids from lower middle class, and now they were exposed to a bunch of really affluent kids that you sort of learned some of the soft skills. Yeah.
This is where Pete gets his edge.
There's a theme. I did have a nice VCR back then.
He stole stuff.
So I mean, I would say that it was just sort of this environment that fostered personal accountability, but also sort of a profound understanding that the environment that you grow up in makes a big impact on the opportunities that you get. And I mean, that to me animates a lot of the things that motivate me now.
Yeah. How do you almost manufacture that in a way to your kids? I mean, it would be great to, in actuality, living in a community like that, but in the absence of being able to do so,
you have a night where you have Pakistan night, and then you go to dinner at a Pakistan.
Bollywood movies are incredible.
Bollywood movies, oh my God! Watch Jab We Met. Anybody out there? It's totally. Every time somebody's complaining, I'm like, Jab We Met. Just watch Jab We Met.
I got some incredible dance moves from that.
Yeah.
Little dilly dilly dong.
The other thing I would say is,
I had to step away from the mic to laugh.
Look how pleased with himself.
Yeah. Part 2 of this is a video podcast. I host this podcast because I have a face made for radio, but we'll put Pete on. We'll put on some supplemental video.
He's being extremely humble. This guy must loofah twice a day. His skin is impeccable.
Have good skin. And teeth, good teeth.
Good teeth. Yeah, good stock. You gonna kick him in the calves now? This guy's
maybe.
Check his lower lip. No, Ryan's doing well.
I married up. Pete knows the feeling.
We know the move.
But we also, I mean, I've also had, and Pete too, have integrated them into things that I do with the programs that I oversee. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really also given them a lot of perspective on things coming into that.
Yeah. So, I mean, another quote. Which
off the cuff, no scripts. I'm here. True
story.
story. He's not reading this.
Checking my laminated sheet. It was definitely one of the founding fathers. I think it was John Adams. He talked about being like a political statesman and a lawmaker so that his kids could have liberty. And then he said, with that liberty, my kids can study, mathematics and the sciences. And then with that sort of stability, that his grandkids could study things like poetry and art. And I think that's sort of a little bit of the American dream, right? I mean, you had my dad who found it insufferable to raise his kids in a country that did not have liberty, picks up, whole family comes here for that opportunity. I perceive the fact that opportunity is like no other place in the world, in human history. And I work really hard to create some stability. And then, I think we project to our kids that, with that liberty and with that, stability, with, a loving family, social, and maybe a safety net in terms of financial support, they have to go out there and take the opportunities that were given to them and, advance that cause. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that, in this day and age of polarized politics, especially with regards to immigration policy, I think that people should take a step back and really understand no one is really more American than immigrants, right?